Thanks for tuning into the Cloud Native FM podcast show. This is your co-host for this show. My name is Saim Safdar, and I'm also a CNCF ambassador and one of the co-organizer of Kubernetes Community Days Islamabad. So what we are up to, I believe if you happen to searching developer experience, then your search landing up in this YouTube page and where we're talking about. So let me give you some perspective of what we are covering today with our wonderful guest we have. I think from configuration complexities to resource management to scaling security and compliance concern, the road to frictionless developer experience can be daunting. And developer experience, commonly abbreviated as DevEx or DX, has become a common topic within just about any tech circle. But what does it actually mean? How to derive a great developer experience? What are the patterns and practices we have today? What is the fear of developer? Why it is so resistant to its current development environment? How to identify the key stakeholder and how can I enhance my developer experience? So this is the topic for the discussion today. And luckily, we have a wonderful guest, our 20-year of experience and working in a VMware Tanzu can actually help us answer all those questions. So over to you, Brian. Your quick intro, then we initiate proceeding. Over to
Thank
you,
you.
Brian.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's a real delight. Yeah, so I think developer experience is really interesting. So from my own background, I was a head of technology products at Sky TV here in the UK and across Europe, and I've built platforms based on vSphere, Kubernetes, Cloud Foundry. So it's fair to say that I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. I think the key thing is, really just thinking about how this all works with people rather than the technology part, right? And I think that's the challenge that I'm seeing in my role at VMware Tanzu. So at the moment, I'm a field CTO for VMware Tanzu. My job is to help businesses get more from their technology. I'm part of a very small group that works globally across some of VMware's biggest and most interesting customers. So that crosses all forms of industry. So a really interesting role, and hopefully I can bring some of that experience to light today.
Thanks, Brian, once again for being on the show. It's really important to have your perspective on this show around developer experience because it's getting 2024 when it started. It's getting a heat, getting a lot more heater, a lot more energy. It's actually going momentum in this realm as well. So I think most of the people who are actually listening to us or watching us, I think first things come on their mind. What does DevEx actually means?
So I think fundamentally, developer experience or DevEx is about making it easier for developers to make impactful change in organizations. So that is how we go about making services available to them. That is about the processes that they follow. And that's about removing any friction or delays that might get in the way from having a great idea to getting it into production.
Absolutely, 100% agree with what actually you have said. So I think and I can ask one more question like here. How do you look at the DevX? Is it a comet? Is it a planet, star, galaxy? And I'm hopefully it's not a universe.
I think that it really depends on the organization. I think DevEx for me uh, is likely a galaxy. So because it can look very different from different perspectives. Um, I think the key thing again is that this is less about technology for me and more about how we bring some of the experiences from DevOps and SRE into the world that we're working in today. So previously what we had was lots of DevOps teams that were locally optimized, doing some really great work on making developers more productive, but also helping them with things like security, compliance, and some of that plumbing that happens. Unfortunately, I think in many large enterprise, big organizations, what we found was that DevOps didn't necessarily scale the way we thought it would. So we ended up with maybe 10 teams, 100 teams. And all of a sudden, that gave us a really big resource bill because we've got all these great people working in teams. But it also meant we're kind of fragmented. So One team might choose one tool or a way of working, another tool might opt for something else. And so there's little in the way of collaboration in that way to make sure we're getting the best across the organization. So I think for DevEx and platform engineering, so it's very closely tied, it's about how can we do that for developers? How can we really help them on that path to production, get the tools out the way, and understand what the challenges are they're really facing? And one of the nicest things that I think have happened with DevEx is, as a systems guy from my history, we're finally beginning to really ask the important questions, which is, what do developers do? Like when they're beginning a new code base, how does it start? So it's not just about CI/CD, which we've been doing for years with Jenkins and everything else, right? This is about really getting to grips of what developers do as soon as their fingers touch keyboards. So is it plugins to Visual Studio Code? Is it plugins to other IDEs? Is there a way to make containers easier on their desktop? Because in my experience, whenever you ask developers about their experience, all of their pains really are getting a working dev and test environment up and running rather than necessarily getting into production.
Yes, absolutely. And I think on the question, like I do think like it's closer to the galaxy, because you can actually count developers or the
Mm.
planet and stars are the tools. So there are a lot of them, and there's a lot of developers opinionated approaches of approaching the tools, and plus onboarding their developer experience on top of it. So I think when we started the container journey way back in 2014, 13, actually, then heading back to the 2016, the container waves actually becoming a very heavier, and the noise is getting absolutely louder than ever. So now people thinking there are companies that realms like Docker who is actually pretty much into the developer's workflow and their whole theory around how developer becomes more proficient in some sort of their development environment. But a lot of the other companies haven't speak about developers in any persona. But now they see more and more current companies investing, and their tagline is becoming developer experience. So now the question naturally becomes this one: why investing in DevEx is important for companies now? Why not before?
Well, that's a brilliant question and one that I get asked on a regular basis. Usually, in terms of what does the return on investment look like? If we're going to spend all this time and money building a great developer experience, what can we expect as a result? So, I think the best place to start is with developers themselves. Um, Fundamentally, in any organization, the challenge is getting really good developers in your team and getting them to do successful work. Getting good developers, though, is a challenge in itself. And what many organizations are finding is that attrition in developers is remarkably high. They can be a difficult breed to keep happy. But fundamentally, if you can, happy developers write better code with less bugs and they stay in the organization longer. So you're going to save money in terms of the cost of rehiring. You're going to save money in terms of the time it takes for code to be developed, and you're going to save money in terms of the quality of the code, both in terms of bugs, but also in terms of security vulnerabilities as well. So a developer experience is about making sure developers can be impactful. And fundamentally, that's why we all come to work, right? We all want to do the outcome, the output that we're planning to get from this job. If there's things that get in our way, those are annoyances or toil, as we call them. If there's too much of that, then developers will go to a place where it's easier to be impactful. So if you're working in a large financial institution and you're trying to make a one-line change or improve the UI for a developer kind of portal or something, and it takes months to get that change through, developers aren't really feeling that they're making the change in the world they'd like to see. Whereas if you've got a system that allows them to do that faster, but at the same time with safety gateways along the way to make sure there's no bad mistakes made along in that process, then that's gonna just gonna make them feel more motivated to make more change, to do more. So developer experience, very important, I think, from a hiring perspective, from a retention perspective, but really as well, it's productivity and it's quality.
Yes, absolutely. Strongly agree with all the words we actually said. And I think like now the people is like was speaking about what is DevEx, we're speaking about how you look at it. And I was speaking about the investing companies are now doing compared to the before version of it. And I think
Mm.
like I can actually say from the my developer experience as well, like when you now people actually arguing in 2017, 2018, why developers use a tool that is required in the DevOps machine, because their duty was to have a zero downtime or a canary deployment, making sure the code is actually working in separate instances as expected. And you asking developers to use a technology to develop locally and test the zero downtime in your machine before deploying into the production. There's a lot of debates on that perspective as well. But now we actually are doing. We know it's very helpful if we develop like this in a going forward. So eventually, when you're developing in a very complex system, the developer experience is very important, because in order to have a boilerplate code of 17 lines, you have plethora of different instances running, and it's a very convoluted job for you if you're maintaining in a longer run as well. So I think before we meet, I think we met last week and we internally chatting about that sometimes developers are very much stitchy and very much attracted, like a mother and child relationship with their development environments. So it is sometimes very tougher to ask, oh, use an IDP, use that developer portal and do the stuff you are doing. So I think, what is your takeaway? Because spend a lot of the time with some good companies. What is developer friction, resistance, and the fear of breaking the development environment?
So I think what's happening is something that as systems people we've done before, and it's not great. And that is we build a new tool to help everybody, and then we get very upset that nobody wants to use it. However, when we build an internal developer platform, one of the biggest mistakes I see is that no developers were involved in capturing requirements or testing it as it was built. So it's not too surprising, right, that they're not really interested in using it. After all, they've spent a lot of time and effort building their own solution that works for them. So there has to be some kind of benefit to them in using this brand new tool that you've invented. I think that's the first thing, though, right? Is that we need to be able to sell that tool much like we would if we were our own little company. And this is the thing that I try and get operations teams or platform teams to do, is to think of themselves not as just a team in some company, but as a little baby company. That means we need to think about who our market is, what problem are we trying to solve in the world, and how do we involve them. If it was our own little company, we would do things like market research, right? We wouldn't just put something out into the universe and hope for the best. Likewise, we'd probably try and find some ways of selling or marketing the thing that we've built. So we might have a website that's not hardcore techie information about all the tools, but really high level. What does this thing do? Why would you want to use it? How much does it cost? What are the benefits of this over something else? Then we'd go out with a minimal viable product. We would test it in the real world. We'd get feedback from developers, and we'd use some of that great feedback to then try and convince more users, customers, developers to use this, right? And we shouldn't forget that there's um, some important kind of theories that stand behind this that might get in our way. The one that I talk about regularly is about diffusion of innovation. And what this generally means is that different people in your organization are going to accept change in different ways, which makes sense, right? Some of us are very conservative, some of them are very risk averse, others are much more kind of willing to take new things on and accept that it might not work. Well, companies are no different. We're all made up of lots of individuals. And the theory behind this is of the fusion of innovation is that we can separate those people into a couple of different groups. We have our early innovators. They are going to be there no matter what. It's a brand new tool. They want to be on the cutting edge. And again, they'll accept that it might not work all the time. We have our early adopters, and they are again very similar. They see the benefit in technology and they see it as a vehicle for change. So they jump on board. Together, that represents about 15% of a populace of people. And that's what I find in organizations. They get this platform built, they get maybe 10, 15% of the organization using it, and then it kind of stops. The adoption just stops and they struggle to get the rest. And the reason for that is they haven't worked out that the rest of the organization needs to be spoken to in different ways. They are more risk averse. They're not going to accept some of the risks that the early adopters did. So, what do we do? Well, the first thing is we need to build that momentum from our early adopters to show that we've solved a lot of the problems, that we've ironed out like our onboarding process, like our day one process, that we have a great level of support in place, and we get little sound bites from those people to help us sell that platform to the rest. The key thing is we need to be able to demonstrate that this thing has value. You should give up your own tools for this, for these reasons, and that's evident because of A, B, and C. And ideally, that would be different groups of the organization that have already had success. Just like any other product, right? We would build a community around it, and we'd try and leverage that community, ambassadors in that community, like the CNCF, to try and help sell that as a way forward for the rest of the org. So, in summary, I think the key thing with developer experience is that we need to be focusing on that human element. We need to think less of ourselves as technical people and take on board some of those softer skills that we weren't taught in university and perhaps we haven't really exercised during our role. But that is marketing, that is sales, that is customer service. That's making sure that developers have a really great experience from the moment they start to the minute they've got a problem, all the way through.
Yes, absolutely. And you actually phrase it wonderfully well because I see like you have to divide the company with different things they are doing. Some of them are early adopters, some are innovating, and somebody are using it. I think that's a very good analogy of how people relate these things to the platform as a product approach as well. So you treat your platform as a product. So basically, how you treating your software development life cycle as well. And if you're doing it, there's a one very natural question came up in the people's mind because we're saying you are treating your platform as a product, you actually building it behind the scene, and then you have application that's running at the end on this platform that you're building behind the scene. So now your customers actually, as you mentioned, is developers who consuming your platform internally and deploy application on top of it, and your user are happy and because now it's have a very good unique bound. But some arguments, some people might say, now in a company there's too much things happening. One, you getting feedback from your developers, and then you giving then your developers are getting feedback from users about the application they are deploying, and then your platform engineer is actually getting feedback from developers who running application on idp that you're building behind the scene as well. So what is, because there is so many feedback going on, so the one can argument like what is the bare minimum of return on investment of investing in the developer experience? And I think and it's the question is actually behind the scene is like, or there is only an idp approach exists today that is talking about developer experience or something else?
So the obvious answer here is again to think about tools because that's where our brain goes, right? Maybe it's an IDE standardization. Maybe it is around adopting something like GitHub or GitLab as your main tool, or maybe it's adopting Kubernetes. Maybe it's public cloud. But in my experience, none of those things are going to be differentiating changes for DevEx. The best thing I've done with companies of all different industries, and it's one of the most fun things that I do at work as well, is called a value stream map. And it sounds very boring, but effectively what we do is we get everyone from the business, representatives from across the business, into one room. So you might have 20, 30 people there covering everything from finance to incident management, design, developers, architecture, support, SDLC, compliance, security, you name it, we get them all in one room. And what we do is we take a huge wall with lots of sticky notes and we chart out exactly what the process is from having an idea to getting it into business as usual support. So it can take quite a couple of hours, but it's generally a fun and interactive process where we all kind of add stickies along the way. We'll then look at how much time it takes for each of those little stickies to happen. And then we'll have a look finally at the annoyances. So everyone gets a couple of red dots, and they get to put the red dots on the parts of the process that hurt them the most. Now, the best thing about this exercise is that the minimum viable product, if you like, for investing in to get an ROI, is to find something that your team is going to see real benefit in. And not only is it going to help you in terms of better productivity and moving faster, but it's going to give you that momentum with people as well. If they see a win that counts for them and that they were part of, they're more inclined then to do the exercise again, and thus you end up with more improvements, right? So with this exercise, the thing that I always see is that it's not necessarily the time that it takes for each action to happen. It's the lines between those processes. It's the gaps between. And that's the handovers. That's where a ticket goes from team A to team B, and it could be an email, it could be a ticketing system, it could be a Slack chat, whatever it is, but there is then a delay between one team saying we need something and another team being ready to provide it. So by looking at that large process for that specific organization, we're able to hone in on what's the one thing we could do right now without too much trouble, without too much change, that would just improve lives for as many people as possible. And that could then be implementation of a tool, or it could be looking at simplifying a process. Or one of my favorites is looking at all the approval steps and asking, great, so we have an approval step here. How many times have we denied progress at that stage? And if we haven't said no in that approval for months, does it need to be an approval that's going to stop the world? Or could that instead be a reporting system so that it can be reviewed for audit, but it doesn't stop us moving forwards? And those tiny little wins, those tiny little snippets only come when we get people together. Because too many times we see developers have an optimized IDE. We have security, they've got their optimized documents and the way they're approaching from their perspective, how they do security. And we've got operations going, well, we've got a great Kubernetes platform. If it's too difficult to use, though, you should learn Kubernetes, right? These are the insular views. By getting everyone in the room, we can share, we can communicate, and we can work much better together.
Yes, absolutely. That's super important exercise to have. I literally a strong believer of this activity as well, because sometimes you need a combined observability matrix within the whole organization. What one thing is actually everybody is hunting on. And if you find a spot, then this means there is a very good in ROI of having this thing done immediately, that causing everyone in a delay, and there's the internal fights going on between the team who will solve first. So I think this is a very important conversation. And I think in this exercise, you're able to calculate the combined metrics of multiple teams sharing their perspective. And as you mentioned, is there really incredible way you think about is like, how do you actually minimize the approval? Because as is in today's world, there are still many of approvals that hasn't been gone away. They're still in there, but nobody knows why is it. And because as you know, as a companies, as a employees moves and the come and go away, and there's approval is already been there, so he thinks it's a part of the culture of the organization, or might be something that we learned, the company learned the hard way, and I do not want to remove it. And he's not speaking with anyone unless there is a huge bottlenecks come in and he talks to all the executive in there. This is a very productive activity. I believe you have to do it, I think, more often than not, because it's really a pain solver for you as well. So I think we spoke about DevEx, we spoke about why important, we spoke about some things to you prioritize the developer experience. Now, I think the next conversation is very important, because some companies are investing in the developer experience, but they're not getting good results. And that's where people would like to know, what are the common symptoms or observability metrics for poor developer experience?
Mm. So I think the first is clearly if you're not able to react quickly to changes. So for example, if you're only releasing new versions of your application once a year or once every 6 months, then that can be a sign of problems. That being said, I want to be very careful and say that it's not necessarily a race to see how many production deployments you can do. The critical thing is that if you had to do a deployment tomorrow, do you have a process that enables you to do that? So in many organizations, we see this love of metrics and just want to see, we're doing 500 deploys a day, so we must be great at this. It's not necessarily true. But importantly, you have to have the capability of deploying. So number one is obviously just the number of deploys you're able to do. I think the other is the efficiency. If you go through this value stream map and you work out how much of your time is spent doing active work, be that in an automated system or on a paper-based exercise, but how much of it is wasted with this idle time of tickets being passed from one to t'other. That's another great sign of, back to lean principles, it is just wasted effort. If we can reduce that waste, then two things happen. First of all, we all have more time to do our work, which is fantastic. But the other thing is it reduces frustration. As you said, in IT particularly, we end up with one team not liking the other because they're working in a different way. They don't understand that we need this quickly. All of these type of arguments come to the surface. So I think looking at the waste in your process is really important. And that's not about blame, that's about just finding ways to improve. And I would say again, 9 times out of 10, it is not doing the work that takes the time, it's getting the work started that is the killer. So I think that looking at that waste is a key thing. Um, Without doubt, I think attrition in developers has to be a significant factor as well. If you can't keep good developers, then that's a big, big warning sign. Good developers usually don't leave if they feel impactful in their work. And it doesn't matter how many monitors that you give them. It doesn't matter how many beanbags you have in the office. It doesn't matter about the swag that you might give them on a monthly basis or how many days off. If they can't be productive in the work that they want to do, if you won't let them develop, they are going to leave. So that I think is another key metric. And again, all of these things are easy to turn around by just, blurring out the tools a little bit and really thinking about how we all interact together as a community.
Yes, absolutely. And I think like a key point in here is like I usually see, because I spend a lot of time in the developer world as well. Usually developer love to live in the silos. They have a separate room. They're working on with fingers and minds, don't want to interrupt anybody, and they keeps on coding with each other. I think it's very important to have a collaboration between the developers and the other DevOps and platform engineering team as well. I think if you can do one thing better, you can create some sort of within a company monthly or 4 months times or 6 months at a time to manage some meetups internally within the developer space, so he can educate what he has done, what feature he has developed, so other can understand it. So then there is a wonderful, because there are developers, so that's where one way of collaborating as well. I see a lot of organization developers love to live in the silos. I hope this will be changed sometime as well. But as Brian said, these are the very important consideration to have, because that's as poor symptoms is often come from is when you actually, I think that a lot of the organization is looking at the Dora matrix, like main time to recovery, main time to success, but they're not understanding like is developer is effective with the tool set he or she has. If the tool set is not productive enough, is impossible to ask them you are not good at various metrics, because he has some good arguments that this tool is actually having 10 minute or 20 minute of onboarding time. So that's require me every day. I come into the laptop, run a control shift B command. I just to have to wait because there's nothing happening on my screen. I just need to see, oh, there's a browser opening up, and now I can scroll through as well. So it's very important to take those consideration as well. I think usually people like to think is the onboarding, as you mentioned, is how much effective the change that has done is tested and actually deployed. But these are the Dora metrics, but I think there's some internal conversation must be done. I think if the developers are not speaking very often, that is a sign of so many bad things happening in the company. Not actually identification of the fly, but these things are happening because sometimes you find that two development teams are using a same sort of personas and having a same shared library, but they're not letting other that we have a shared library that you can consume as well. That is actually a very good analogy that they're not collaborating. And if that shared library becomes a universal or some sort of a cultural in the organization, that save time, that save humongous time as well. That's happened to me in some of the companies as well. We don't even know, like there's a something that's uniquely available within the company, but we don't know which team is actually using the same libraries that we have as well. So I think it would be great, like if somebody spend time on creating some meetup internally within the developers, so they can actually do not live in silos, but live in the community like others people speaking all the time with different folks and different people as well. So I think final few question before we actually end the conversation, and that's your key takeaway on how to drive. We speak about so many good things on the podcast today, but that's very important to end some sort of here because we spoke about so many challenges we have for the developers. But I want to make some happy faces for all of them after the conversation. So, how to drive great developer experience?
So obviously there's hours of content in that alone because we could narrow in on any of the single topics. I think the critical thing to do for developer experience is to look at their journey from the moment you hire them to the day that a change goes through some kind of incident process, all the way through. So their first day of work, did they have a laptop on time? Did they have access to systems? If not, then that could have a bad start, and there's some science behind there to suggest that that can affect how long they'll stay in an organization. How long does it take them from being a brand new developer in a brand new team to doing their first bit of productive work? If that's a really long time, it's not great for the company, but it's not great for them either. It means that whatever systems you have or whatever code base you have is probably overly complicated or very difficult to work with. So that time to be productive is another thing to focus on. Then looking at the tools they are using, and sitting down with a developer is one of the best things you can do. I love sitting with people when they're doing their work, and I just sit there and say, show me, show me what it looks like. And that's when you see something that you can perhaps improve. Or you think to yourself, oh my God, they do this every day, or they do this every change. We have to make this better. It wouldn't be something that we would do, but again, developers are focused. They're trying to get this code into production. That's their narrow focus. If we can help them with better tools along the way, that'd be great. And then thinking about how we all communicate is another key thing. So if developers want to get things done into production quickly, but we have all the security, compliance, and everything else, if these things are too difficult to implement, then developers will either do it themselves or they'll find a way around it. And I think that's where platform engineering can really be useful, because we bring all of those things into a platform, we bake them in so the developers just get them by default. And especially if we can give them the right information, they'll make the right choices. So we've all seen the shift left movement where even things like security or testing, we give that detail straight to developers from the first code commit, so they can tell whether what they've got is secure or not. And developers being developers, they will then work to make that better as long as they've got the information up to hand. If you wait until the very final commit, the day before it's meant to go to production, and then you do a security scan and find out that's all wrong, everyone's going to have a bad time. So I think that communication is really important. So again, stepping back, I think the key thing for developer experience is not to worry about tools straight away. It's to really think about what their journey looks like as an employee at the company, and then look at how we can make that better for them. Because if they're more productive, it's better for all of us.
Yes, absolutely. Super, super informative as well. I think one question on that topic as well. We know there is some wonderful momentum going on this year in the developer ecosystem, and the companies investing in now in the developers time and productivity and making sure they've inputting value within the organization with some cost effective solution with mean time to recovery, mean time to success. But those companies are only planets, not a galaxy of the companies in there.
Hmm.
So what are the reason why there's only a planets of the companies investing in the developer experience, but the galaxy, this noise is still being very faded. So what is a major cause that a lot of the people still not putting the attention that is actually required for developers?
So I think there's two things there. I think the first one is digital transformation, which is again a huge topic in itself. But fundamentally, most businesses are finding that turning some of their customer journeys, their end customer journeys, into some form of digital journey is making them more profitable, making them more productive, and it's what customers want. Whereas before we might like to speak to a human about any problem that we have, in this day and age, generally speaking, we'd much prefer to be able to do that self-service either on a computer, on our mobile, wherever we are, whenever we are. We don't want to have to wait between the hours of 8 till 6 and stay on hold for 20 minutes, right? We want to be able to get this really quickly. So having a really smooth having a really smooth customer experience is more profitable for your business. In order to achieve that, you need great development. So therefore, developer experience gives you customer experience, gives you profit. So not all businesses are going to work that out at the same time. And in fact, some businesses just may not be that way. But we are seeing that move quicker and quicker. Many businesses are now being challenged. So where we found, for example, automotive was all about cars and horsepower and how quickly you go from 0 to 60. Whereas now, when people are buying cars, it's more of an experience for the driver or the passengers. So what does the entertainment system look like? Does this integrate with my phone? Are the map systems up to date? So, the expectation from a user perspective is now so much higher because we've got all these things in our pockets. So when we have something out in the real world, we expect that same level across the board. So many companies are seeing that, but it's not all going to happen at the same time. The second, I think, is leadership styles, if I'm being honest. I think in IT particularly, we still have some more traditional views, which is developers will be told what to do and they'll do it this way because it has to be done this way. This is for compliance, this is for security. There is only one way of working. Now, in many orgs, that may work, but that's why we have shadow IT. People will find the path of least resistance. The secret, in my humble opinion, is to be part of that solution rather than trying to fight people all the way. When I speak to people that have one way of working and it's very much this way or nothing else, they are generally also people that are not talking to other departments about their views. So I think it's really important that organizations are more open to having those conversations. And if you look at orgs that have a great culture of transparency, of communication, of collaboration, those are the ones that are having more success with DevEx because it just comes naturally for them in the way of working.
Yes, absolutely. Both are very important conversation as well. I see very less people spoke about it, but you actually have a bullseye because that is really a pain we're getting it is that leadership style. And plus some companies, as you mentioned, is not actually looking at the metrics compared to the some other metrics that the companies are occupying as well. But it's a very wonderful chat. I learned a lot. I really wish we have more time on this stuff as well because it's been one of the conversation do you don't want to end up here as well. But I want you to do some summary because you have actually spoke about some very critical conversation, some are really new for me as well. some of the analogy you actually draw, like everybody in the same table, having some sticky notes in there, go into the board and let's talk about it, pinpoint and do a red dot. One of the things is actually facing everyone in the company, and then see what are the things that need approval. That's a wonderful things I learned from today as well, because that's a very super productive activity for the organization. But it's up to you now, because I want you to do a recap of whatever we've done so far. So what's your 5 key takeaways on developer experience?
Now, this is where we find out I can't actually count to 5 while thinking at the same time, but let me try anyway. So I think number 1 is that good developer experience is critical for businesses to be successful in their digital transformation. I think the second is that it's vital that we look away, take a step back from the tools, and really think about people and what their challenges look like, and what how we try and make their lives better. So people are key in all of this. As you said, the value stream map, the journey for a piece of code going from an idea through finance and into production, and all the steps included, I think is vital for an organization to work out. All too often, we're in those silos that we spoke about, where we're just focusing on what we do and making our stuff great. Well, there's no point in making our stuff great if other people can't use it or don't want to use it. So I think it's important we look at that overall journey and start thinking about us rather than just me. Number 4, I would say that when we look at that journey, again, it's not necessarily about pointing fingers at teams that need to be faster. It's about looking at how we communicate and collaborate together. Much in the same way that we talked about some of the other theories, like, there's value stream mapping, there is diffusion of innovation. I would add Conway's law to that list of things to research if you've not come across it before. All it says is that the way that your company communicates will have an impact on the end product that your company produces. So if your communication is siloed and doesn't really work, you'll find your products are generally siloed and are not very well integrated. So you need to think about changing your communication to change your product. And then last but not least is that platform as a product piece. I think that whatever we do in teams, we need to think of ourselves as a little business that has customers, and we need to treat them as customers. That means we are serving their needs. So if our customers aren't happy with what we're doing, we're probably doing the wrong thing. There must be a better way of achieving that. So that's my top 5, I think.
Absolutely great, wonderful. I really like all of those as well on the list, because that's it's what I see some of the companies are heading up to as well. So I think, I believe, like, I just give a one takeaway, because I'm not very much as Brian in this industry as well. So I think if you're doing a developer experience, I believe your communication becomes better. And if you are doing a DevEx and your communication is not getting better, it's mean you are not doing in a right way. So that is my key takeaway as well. But really enjoy the conversation with Brian. Brian has a wonderful, unique perspective into this domain as well. I'll enjoy every bit of the communication we have. And I believe this is a very super productive chat. If the companies are investing in the developer experience, platform engineering, IDP, and they wanted to make stuff done in a better way, then the Brian thoughts should be implemented in the production setup. And that production setup is your company. So figure it out as well. So Brian has also written down some articles on some of the wonderful content on the public as well. So I link those up as well. And he has his own perspective. He writes some blog about. I shared the link in the chat as well. And if you have some question, please share in the YouTube chat description. And Brian and I'm happy to add our perspective on the conversation as well. With that, thank you very much, Brian, for being in the show. It's my pleasure talking to you. And the points you bring on the table is super vital, and I'm looking forward to meeting you again in near future for some other stuff on platform engineering, developer experience, DevOps, and some other stuff. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye bye. Stay safe, stay happy, and we will meet you again.